The stories contained in this podcast are the recollections of the guests we've invited onto the show. We are merely an outlet for people to share their truths, and we accept no legal responsibility for the stories contained herein.
I'm Kendra Sheets.
And I'm Rich Gill.
And this is Enough, a podcast which aims to shine light into the darkened corners of the music industry while discussing the ways we can and should improve ourselves and, in turn, our community. Welcome to another episode of the Enough podcast. I am one of your hosts, Kendra Sheets.
I am your other host, Rich Gill.
And this is our subtext section of the podcast. It is a subset of Enough, in which we attempt to try and give some insight, some information on some of the overall broad themes that we talk about in the actual interview part of the podcast. Today, we are talking about our flaws.
We're kind of going off the book a little bit on how we usually do these. Usually these are very information, fact-based.
Outlined, written up.
Yeah, you can Google our sources. They're all out there.
So today we're our own sources. We are talking about times where before COVID, before the podcast, before we were the people that we are right now, basically before we knew better. I feel like one of the things that gets talked about in this subject a lot is the idea of people not responding properly, whatever properly is defined as in that specific situation, not being open to what's being said, just kind of giving the support that the survivor needs. And as we've gotten more and more into taking care of your mental health and attempting to help with the mental health of other people through your actions and your concerns, I think overall, everyone or some people are trying to make a concerted effort to try and be better. And hopefully, they're taking steps in the right direction to be as supportive as they can. But I think we all have had times where we straight fucked up. We did the wrong thing at the wrong time and said the wrong shit. And hopefully, we've learned from that. I know Rich and I aren't the same people that we are today as when we met. Thank God. Yeah. But there's always a lot of learning and growth to do. And today we're going to talk about some times where we could have been better. And if we hopefully came across those situations today, we would have been better.
And also something to point out is, we've kind of been doing this we've been doing the podcast now for over a year. And we've been kind of doing this sort of advocacy, whatever you want to call it, work in our personal lives for even longer. And something that we, sort of have to keep in mind when people are telling us their stories and when we're talking to other people about assault and harassment and abuse, just because we're at a point of understanding and how we sort of react to situations, doesn't mean that everyone is at that same point. People are still learning about this stuff, in some cases for the first time. And we have to show a little bit of, grace and understanding that nobody comes fully formed with this knowledge. We have to learn how to talk to people, learn how to react in situations. A lot of it is sort of empathy. But some of it is just, you don't know how you're going to act in a situation until you're in that situation. That was always one of my worst interview questions at jobs. So it'd be like, what would you do in this situation? I don't know. Until I'm in that situation, I don't know what I'm going to do.
Jump out the window and bail.
Exactly. Curl up in a corner and cry with a bottle of fucking Jack Daniels. I don't know.
But let me add also, to kind of compound on what Rich just said, while we are not the same people that we were years ago, we're also not perfect. We do stuff wrong all day long. We do not respond to things the way today that we would 2 weeks from now. I mean, that's part of the growing human process. And, I think it's a beautiful disaster in a lot of ways where, you can look back with time and be like, thank God, like we just said, thank God I'm not the person that I was back in, 2015 or whatever.
Well, even going back to the beginning of this podcast, I can listen to some of those early episodes. I don't, but...
And I don't. I hate the sound of my voice, so I never listen to any of our episodes.
But I can remember stuff that I said or, things like that. And after another year of going through all this, knowing that if I was in that same situation, I would not have said the same thing, or I would have not, reacted in the same way. So it's a constant growth.
And I think it's important to always try and keep in mind in these scenarios, even though it is so hard, that people are trying to do the best they can with whatever they have available. I mean, and that goes across the board with most things. I mean, most of us are riddled with trauma, generational or social or otherwise. And that, that sits in deep in your body in a number of ways. So like Rich said, I mean, you kind of don't know how you're going to handle something until it comes at you. There's plenty of times where, despite how much I've done personal work, with and without a therapist on my own, through reading, through researching, through just journaling, thinking, and attempting to be a better human being, there are still times where things come towards me and I act, in hindsight, like a complete asshole. We all do, and we probably all will. But the idea is to kind of showcase your growth, see what you can do to try and keep moving forward, and just try and be the best you possibly can, and be as empathetic as you can to other people, because as much as you're struggling with, they're struggling with the same but different every single day, and no one's ever functioning 100% anymore in this climate.
Exactly. Yeah. And the motto that we sort of use for this podcast, which we stole from I Think You Should Leave with Tim Robinson, I used to be a piece of shit, people can change.
We focus heavy on the people can change part, and we don't try to shame ourselves with I used to be a piece of shit.
Right.
But it's a compound.
With that said, here are a couple of times when we were maybe close to pieces of shit.
One time that I have been thinking about a lot, it's kind of a one of my main anxieties comes from being social. I thought I was always a very social person, but it turned out I just really like drinking, and then I would just fuck up a bunch of stuff. And it would make things a lot worse. Yeah, so I'm actually super introverted, social when I feel like it. And there were a lot of times, especially when I first moved back to Chicago back in like 2012 through probably 15, where I was trying to kind of wedge myself into a social circle and, know a lot of things, talk to a lot of people, and be, show them how great I was. So I felt like I fit in somewhere. And I remember one of these scenarios where I was talking, I found out about some sort of party. I wasn't invited. That was pretty shitty to me at the time. Now I, don't care, but I was really upset that I wasn't invited. And,
so you crashed.
Right. Until I crashed the party, and then, no, just kidding. But in this scenario, someone was relaying to me what happened at the party. And it was a bunch of people I knew from the Chicago music scene on the north side of the city. And people were super drunk, and people started making out, as you do when you're drunk at a party. And this guy and this girl that I knew, I guess, were making out on the couch. They'd been flirting heavy all night, from what I had heard, and they went off to the bedroom. From what I heard, they had sex. Okay, none of my business, but someone was telling me, so it became my business.
Sure.
And then that was the story that I had. I mean, that there was other, issues, it's ups and downs about the party. It was just kind of told in passing. And maybe months later, maybe a year, I'm not really quite sure on the timeline of that, I was told a different story from friends of the female who was in that situation. And it was that she was very drunk. He was very flirty. They went off to the bedroom, not really sure if she was completely consenting with that, or if it was kind of maybe she ran off to the bathroom to throw up or not feel good, lay down, whatever it was. But they both ended up in the bedroom, and he forced himself on her non-consensually and ultimately assaulted her. When I was told that side of the story, it was from a specific, really tight-knit group of women. And my first response was, that's not what I heard. Well, I wasn't there.
You weren't there, yeah.
Right. So it's just hearsay. All sides of it are hearsay. But ultimately, in 2012, 13, 14, 15, whatever the hell it was, I would like to think that I was a decent person at that time. I would like to think that I was empathetic to people around me, but that was completely the wrong thing to say.
Yeah.
And it was, I didn't know. There'd be no reason why I believe one person over another, except that story came to me first. So that's what I heard. So therefore, that was my truth at that moment, because that's the guidelines of my reality of that scenario that I was not part of. And instead of listening to the story about a possible abuse situation, I just was like, nah, I don't know about that. I don't know that that's true. That's not the story that I heard. And that was it. And it came back later to bite me in the ass when I was talking to some people about possibly doing PR for a band. And this person was very good friends with a woman who had gotten abused. And ultimately, I lost the ability to work with this band, great up and coming band, because I did not side with the victim of the situation or the survivor, depending on how she'd like to be praised. And because my whole kind of persona at that moment was, that's not what I heard, therefore I don't know if that's true or not. Don't you think she might have been lying? I think maybe she just didn't know, or maybe she was drunk. And that was one of the other things I didn't really quite understand, even for my own personal point of view, what consent really meant. Because at that point in my life, in my like mid to late 20s, if two drunk people had sex, that was consensual. I mean, as long as no one said no drunkenly, that's 100% totally fine. Whereas now, my opinion, much, much later in my life, is very different on what consent actually means. I would not deem two drunk people having sex to be 100% consensual at this time. I would have my doubts and my questions. And so, that's just kind of just a brief example of how I lost potential friends over it. I now am probably solidified in somebody's mind as somebody who doesn't believe them or a scenario that 100% to them, this is their truth. And this is what happened to them. And for some reason, I'm now on the other side of that as a woman saying, I don't know that I believe you on that. And that's really, really hurtful. I mean, to me and my own actions, I hurt myself by not really being aware of what I was doing at that point in time. And should that scenario come back today, there's no way in hell I would respond to it that way. I may ask some questions, not because I don't believe anyone, but just to kind of,
clarify,
get more of the story, make sure they're okay, see if there's anything I could do to help them in their scenario, be it 1 year from it happening or 5 years from it happening. It's bizarre to me as someone who at that point in their life had been abused, had been assaulted, had been raped. My weird maybe it was internalized misogyny. Maybe it was just not knowing how to handle things, not really having explored that. My instantaneous thought was, I don't know that that's true. Whereas if that scenario happened to me, I would be infuriated that someone didn't believe me.
Did you end up ever coming face to face with either of the people who were involved in the assault?
Yeah. So the woman blocked me from everything on the internet.
Understandably so.
Understandably so. She's still around, I think. I don't really know. I don't keep tabs. She at one point dated somebody that I knew. I didn't really spend a lot of time kind of in that specific group. So unless it was in like a large show setting, I don't know that I saw her.
Today, if you saw the woman, would you have anything to say to her? Do you think she'd have anything to say to you?
I mean, I would like to say that I was sorry and that I was wrong for my behavior. I don't know that she'd give me the time of day,
Fair.
Because honestly, if the situation was reversed, fuck anyone who didn't believe me. Although she's not the one who told me. Neither one of the parties actually involved were the ones who told me anything about what was going on. It was all friends and hearsay. So I never once said, oh, that's not true, or, oh, I believe you, to anyone actually involved. It was all social bullshit. But no, I mean, I completely, she has no reason to want to talk to me ever again and assume that I have not changed as a person and I'm fucking vile. Because if the situation was reversed, that's what I would think until someone showed me otherwise.
I mean, I know, like, I can speak for myself. I know that there's still people out there who probably think that I'm terrible and vile because of the way I acted when I was in my early 20s.
Oh, I know. And that's one of the hardest parts about not just this, but like being alive is that people meet you for a certain period of time of their life. You're not a long haul person for most people. So their memory of you is however you acted in that snippet of their life. I mean, there are some people from Los Angeles who still remember me in like a mini skirt flashing basically my butt, like dancing on a bar, chugging rum and cokes, which I haven't even had in like at least 15 years. Like,
haven't we talked about
I think we
the
have. I mean, how many
Captain
relationships does a
Morgan sort
lady
of?
need? I mean, just the complete opposite is going on right now. I mean, I'm wearing big flannel pajama pants. I'm sitting in my house in, on a Monday evening, not going out, not drinking.
Yeah,
People change. And that's the thing is, as Rich was saying, like, it's hard to, on all sides. I mean, for the person who's done the changing, for myself to be like, hey, guess what? I'm not shitty anymore. Please be nice to me. And then the other side thinking, I don't need to talk to this person in any way because this is who they were, which means this is who they are. And that sucks on a number of levels when you're somebody who wants everybody to like you all the time.
yeah. Well, and it's interesting because sometimes the opposite can happen also. So this is sort of an unrelated story to the one I'm going to tell, but I reached
Ooh,
out
a
to
bonus story.
bonus story. This is just a real quick one though. I reached out to someone this past weekend who is going through some pretty intense personal issues, and I started out the message with like, first of all, I want to apologize for stuff that happened in the past. It was nothing like nefarious or abusive or anything like that. It was just like it was a situation that I just didn't feel very good about. And she replied and she was like, I just want you to know, like, you don't have to apologize for that. I would never hold someone to how they used to be versus how they are now as like a changed person. I was like, that's very kind of you. I mean, that's not, how a lot of people see the world, but I was very appreciative of that.
It helps in opening up that dialogue because when you and not that anyone has to respond that way, but it is hard for everyone, I think, to come to the table and say, hey, I'm really sorry about XYZ.
Yeah, and especially, in a unprovoked setting with, maybe it's reaching out to someone who you haven't talked to in a while. Act on like, well, I haven't seen this person in 15 years, so I'm not gonna like just reach out and apologize for no reason.
Right.
But sometimes it's good to do that.
I mean, in a lot of ways, it's kind of like the night step of AA, where you go through and you make your
Oh yeah.
amends.
Yeah.
I mean, it that clears out some cobwebs in the brain when you go through some of that shit because there's
Mm-hmm.
things, especially like that I've been finding out with, and I've talked about this before, that I'm doing EMDR therapy. So things are popping up of things I've been holding on to for a very long time. So there's a whole crew of people that have gotten like weird text messages or Instagram messages recently being like, hey, remember back in this time where I said this? And most of the time, no one really remembers the way that you do. But sometimes they do.
Yeah.
And, one of the things I've been struggling with as a person who has control issues and also cares very deeply about all of the people around them doing all the things all the time to make sure that everyone's, being their best self is that the only person you can support and control and uplift is yourself. I mean, you have no control over what other people say about you, around you, as a response to you. No idea what people are thinking about you at any time. So all you can really do is go out into the world and be the very best version of yourself that you can be that day, whatever you're
Yeah.
taking out into the world that day. I mean, we're never going to be, like I said, 100% because of all the shit that we're carrying around. But it's not up to you to try and do everything you can to change other people's point of view of you. It's your job to, if you're holding on to something, to clear yourself of that. And the best you can do is just apologize for your past behaviors and hopefully move forward. Now let's get into one dumb shit you did, Rich.
Oh, I was just gonna say, episode done. I think that's good. So this is going back like probably 20 years, early 2000s. I got a phone call from someone when I was out of town that she had been raped by a mutual friend of ours. I, was obviously horrified, asked her what happened. She told me. I think I got back into town, I don't know, maybe a week later, a few days later, talked to her more about it, confronted the friend of ours who she said did this, asked him what happened. I was like, hey, I heard this happen. What's your side of it? And he told me that it was all a misunderstanding and it wasn't what she said it was. And I was like, okay. So I went back to her and asked her, I was like, are you sure this is what happened? Like, because
You sure you were raped?
you sure you were raped? Because what I'm
Mm,
hearing from this other person
maybe you're
is
not
that
so
you
raped.
weren't. Uh, Obviously, she got very upset, rightfully so. And I think she was like, fine, just fucking take his side. I don't remember exactly what the conversation was, but I remember her storming off, visibly and understandably upset with me. We continued talking. I don't remember, to be honest, what the resolution to that was, but I do know that I did just about the worst thing that you could do in a situation like this. And not only did I not hold my friend accountable, but I started a band with him instead.
Whew.
Yeah, pretty bad. Pretty shitty way to handle something like that. I stayed friends with the woman. I stayed friends and
I mean,
playing.
did you? Like, was she still talking to you?
Yeah. Um
She's a lot
and
bigger person than I'd be.
well, it came out later how much that I had hurt her and how hard it was for her to see me do something like that. And I mean, it was a fucking betrayal of trust and friendship and so many things. Um, a few years later, I sort of, I don't know, came to my senses and again confronted the man, friend of mine. And this was after we hadn't been in a band together for a while, and we were sort of still friends but not really. But I confronted him again and I was just like, look, I've been thinking about this, and this, like, I have to take this other person's side on this. Like, I believe her, what she said happened. And um I hope that's not the person you are now, but I can't have anything to do with you or be friends with you because of this. Side note to that, I later found out from 4 or 5 other women that had similar stories about him. This was years after the fact.
Not uncommon,
Exactly.
unfortunately.
Which, knowing now that if I had, not that I don't know if that would have made a difference back then, but I didn't have that knowledge back then that
Right.
this is rarely a one-time situation.
Now,
Um,
why do you think that you believed him
mhm.
and thought that she might have just misconstrued something?
You never want to think the worst about close friends of yours, and it's it's hard to sort of face that truth, that this is something that I've learned more and more the older I get. Like, friends of yours, close people to you, you're going to find out have done truly horrible, unforgivable things.
We've all done fucked up stuff to
Yeah,
everyone around
nobody's
us.
perfect.
No, and
Everyone is
it's part
flawed.
of growing up. I mean,
Right.
not that you have to fuck up consistently, but I mean, it's part of the learning process that you do fucked up things. Not talking about assault directly, that's its own situation.
Well, and that's sort of the point, is that there are going to be people in your life who do those unforgivable things. And it's okay for you to not allow them to be in your life anymore, especially if they're not going to take accountability for it. And this person never took accountability for any of it. The closest he came to it was, he had said at one point, I wish I could take back some of the things that happened back then. Thankfully, me and the woman are still friends. She's a good friend of mine. And that whole sort of scenario is one of the reasons why I wanted to do stuff like this and do the podcast and get involved in advocacy work and using my voice to sort of stand up to these people who have assaulted and harassed and raped, and been the voice for people who maybe didn't feel like they could sort of speak out about it. I mean, I still to this day, like, feel absolutely horrible about the way that I handled that situation. But all I can do is just, make sure that it doesn't happen again, and try to, talk to and educate people so that they don't do the same thing in that situation. And that's sort of what we are trying to do with this. The other sort of interesting thing about that, about my story, is that's not the first time that I had been faced with something like this. When I was 16 years old, I saw a friend of mine try to assault another friend of mine.
Holy
And
shit.
yeah, and we were all very, very stoned. And in that moment, I was like, I know this is wrong because I'm watching this happen. She's passed out. He's not. And he's trying to take off her shirt. I can see that this is very wrong. And I stopped him. And I was like, dude, like, no, you got to stop. And luckily he did. But again, it's that you never know what you're going to do until you're in the situation. That I was seeing with my own eyes. I saw assault happening. I knew that I had to stop it, so I did. This other situation, I didn't see it. I didn't want to think that my friend would do something like that. So I didn't handle it in the right way.
For the most part, all of us want to believe the best of everyone. So when someone instantaneously says, this person who you're friends with, or you like are acquaintance with, who you might casually know, did XYZ, your first thought is, or at least mine is always, no, not that person that I see at shows sometimes. They're so nice to me. And how many times have we heard that where the friends say, well, I've been really good friends with him for 15 years. He would never act like that. I've never seen him act that way.
Yeah. He's always been cool to me.
Same with the relationship. You know, I've been in a band with him for so many years. He would never abuse a woman, lay his hands on someone, or something similar to, not always a woman. But kind of inherently want to believe the best out of the people that you surround yourself with. So it's always a struggle to think someone might be trying to deceive, I think, especially if you have some sort of established relationship with them, no matter how close that is. I mean, it's the same thing with guests on this podcast. I mean, every time we put out an episode, somebody seems to respond with talking about why that guest is not a credible source.
Yeah.
Well, they have a story to tell, and we're here to share that story. And we're at a point in our lives where we believe their story.
And we don't take that lightly either. I mean, that's why, to sort of give a peek behind the curtain, and we've talked about this before, like there's an extensive pre-interview, like hours-long pre-interview process with people where we talk to them more in depth about the story than what you hear on the finished podcast. We're not professionals, but we have training in this. We know how trauma looks. We've experienced it ourselves. We've seen it in other people. There are things that are the same in every story. You see it in people's eyes when they're telling the story. You see it in their expression and the way they describe stuff. And it's heartbreaking and terrible. And you see people relive that.
And again, we're not experts. We're not perfect. We're learning like you all are on a day-to-day basis. We're not always going to do the right things. Neither are you. But as long as we're all working together to move forward, that's what's going to change the music scene. That's what's going to change society as a whole. If we all sit here just kind of slinging shit at each other, we're never going to get anywhere.
Just try to keep in mind that not everyone is at the same place when it comes to this. We're all learning. You have to give people some grace and some space to educate themselves, learn this stuff as they go through it. Some people are experiencing being told that a friend of theirs was assaulted for the first time, and they don't know how to react to it, just like I didn't back then.
And they might react to it badly, like I did back then.
Yeah. Or if they listen to this podcast, or they've done some research on their own, read some books, watched some documentaries, hopefully they won't make the same mistakes that we did. Enough is a podcast centering on abuse, harassment, and assault in the music scene. To help get the word out, please like or subscribe and share with your friends. If you have been on the receiving end of harm from someone, be it artist, venue owner, audience member, or someone else, and would like to share your story on a future episode, please reach out to us at thisisenoughpodcast@gmail.com. All correspondences are kept confidential.